You delete a photo of yourself, and seconds later, you're shown an ad for weight loss. You open your phone for a few minutes, and suddenly an hour is gone. You go to work, exhausted, stressed, replaceable, just trying to keep up. And it all feels random, personal, like something is wrong with you. But what if it's not you? What if these moments, the scrolling, the burnout, the pressure to constantly consume and upgrade and optimize yourself, are all connected? And what if they keep happening because they're profitable? We're told that when companies do harmful things, it's because of bad people making bad decisions. But that explanation doesn't go far enough. Because across industries, across countries, the same patterns keep showing up. Not occasionally, consistently. And when something keeps happening like that, it's usually not a coincidence. It's an incentive. The system doesn't just allow harm, it quietly rewards it. And here's the part that matters most. These incentives don't just create profit, they shape the kind of society we live in. A society where what's most rewarded often isn't what's healthiest, or most honest, or most helpful, but what's most addictive, most manipulative. Because those are the things that keep us consuming, keep us scrolling, keep us coming back. And this isn't abstract theory. You can see it playing out right now in the apps on your phone, the food on your shelves, the workplace you show up to every day. So let's walk through exactly what this looks like, the industries doing it, what they're exploiting, and the very real damage it's causing to your mental health, your body, your wallet, and the world you're living in. But we're not going to stop at the problem, because the part that doesn't get talked about enough is that this system isn't the only option. History is full of societies that did this differently and did it well. And there are countries right now showing us a better balance is possible. Not a full blueprint, but enough to touch on what else is possible. Let's get into it. The systems pattern. 1. Exploiting insecurity. At Meta, internal research showed that certain features, especially on Instagram, were making body image issues worse for teenage girls. In fact, their own researchers found that 1 in 3 teenage girls said Instagram made them feel worse about their bodies. They knew. And in some cases, when someone deleted a selfie, that moment was flagged as vulnerability. Not to protect them, to target them with ads, beauty products, weight loss solutions. A moment of self-doubt turned into a sales opportunity. Because if insecurity makes you more profitable, insecurity becomes the product. And when millions of people, especially young people, are constantly pushed toward feeling not good enough, that doesn't just sell products. It creates a society built on insecurity, one where confidence drops, comparison rises, and self-worth becomes something you're told to buy back. 2. Rage equals revenue. Here's something platforms like YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok figured out early. Calm content doesn't spread, but content that triggers something, anger, fear, outrage, insecurity, that spreads fast. So the algorithm adapts. It pushes more extreme takes, more divisive content, more of whatever keeps you reacting. Not because it's true, not because it's good for you, but because it keeps you there. And you can see exactly where this leads. Entire corners of the internet now exist to speak to people who are struggling with dating, confidence, their bodies, their sense of worth. The manosphere, red pill, sigma male content, telling young men the system is rigged against them and here's who to blame. Looks maxing communities pushing extreme techniques, bone smashing, mewing, surgical procedures, because apparently your face is the reason your life isn't working. Wellness spaces that diagnose you with a new invisible condition every week and happen to sell the cure. Political outrage channels that exist purely to keep you furious at whoever's on the other side, or hand you simple answers to problems that are anything but simple. Content that doesn't just acknowledge that pain, it amplifies it. It tells people, this is why you're failing. They are who you should be angry at. And here's the simple, extreme answer that will fix everything. Because simple answers spread better than complicated ones. And hope, especially when someone is desperate for it, is easy to sell. The people consuming this content aren't weak or gullible. They're in real pain, and the system found a way to profit from it, while making it worse. Meanwhile, the platforms hosting all of it, the ones algorithmically amplifying the most divisive, most extreme voices, quietly grow. In 2024, Meta, YouTube, and TikTok combined for over $220 billion in revenue, mostly from advertising, mostly driven by engagement. And engagement is driven by emotion. The more outraged and divided we are, the more we scroll. The more we scroll, the more they earn. 3. Designed to keep you hooked and buying again and again. The same logic runs deeper than your phone. Food companies like Nestle and Coca-Cola have spent decades engineering products to hit the exact combination of sugar, salt, and fat that makes it neurologically difficult to stop eating. Not coincidentally, ultra-processed foods now make up over 60% of the average American diet. And the result? Rates of obesity, diabetes, and diet-related disease have climbed steadily for decades, while the companies selling those products have grown into some of the most profitable on earth. But here's where it gets even more telling. Because the system doesn't just profit from making you sick, it profits from your desire to get better too. The wellness industry saw a real problem. People are genuinely struggling with their health, feeling let down by the food they've been sold, and built a billion-dollar market around it. Extreme elimination diets, supplements that promise everything, wellness influencers pushing protocols with no real science behind them, not trying to make you healthier, just identifying your pain and selling you an easy answer. The other side of the same coin. The same cycle plays out in what we buy. Products aren't built to last anymore. Fast fashion, cheap electronics, constant upgrades. The average piece of clothing is worn 7 times before it's thrown away. Globally, we produce over 92 million tons of textile waste every year. Things break faster, go out of style faster, end up as garbage just as quickly. Because a product that lasts 10 years doesn't sell 10 times, and all of that waste has to go somewhere. The fashion industry alone is responsible for roughly 10% of global carbon emissions, more than aviation and shipping combined. We're not just being sold products, we're being sold a cycle: consume, discard, replace. And the cost of that cycle, to our health, to our wallets, to the planet, doesn't show up in anyone's quarterly earnings report. It shows up everywhere else. 4. Workers as cost units. In Amazon warehouses, every second is tracked, every movement measured. Productivity targets keep rising, while injury rates follow. Amazon warehouse workers are injured at nearly twice the rate of the industry average. Not because anyone sat down and said, let's make people suffer, but because efficiency increases profit, and anything that slows efficiency becomes a cost to cut. When the system rewards speed above everything else, the human body becomes an obstacle to optimize around. And it's not just Amazon. Across industries, gig work, retail, logistics, the same logic applies. Companies like Uber restructured entire workforces by reclassifying workers as independent contractors. Flexibility sounds good, but what it really meant was no benefits, no sick days, no safety net. The risk didn't disappear. It just moved, quietly, legally, onto the worker. 5. When pain becomes profit. In the case of Purdue Pharma, a powerful opioid painkiller was marketed as low risk and widely prescribed. The Sackler family, who owned the company, made an estimated $11 billion from opioid sales. Meanwhile, over 500,000 Americans died from opioid overdoses in the 2 decades that followed. In Canada, more than 53,000 people have died from opioid toxicity since 2016 alone. And today, more than 18 Canadians still die from it every single day. Entire communities, especially working-class towns where pain and hopelessness were already high, were devastated. This wasn't an accident. It was a business model. When pain becomes profitable, so does keeping people in it. Connecting the dots. These aren't random outcomes. They're the logical result of a system that rewards one thing above all else: maximize profit. Not maximize well-being, not maximize truth, not maximize health, profit. And when that's the only goal that gets rewarded, the most successful players aren't the ones who help the most people. They're the ones who extract the most value, the ones who keep you scrolling longer, spending more, coming back again and again, even if it leaves you more anxious, more divided, more addicted. And over time, those are the companies and people that rise to the top, not because they worked harder than everyone else, but because they align themselves most effectively with what the system rewards. In a system like this, harm isn't a side effect. It's a competitive advantage, human impact. And this doesn't just shape companies, it shapes us. Feeling like no matter how hard you try, it's never enough. You start to blame yourself for not being disciplined enough, productive enough, mentally strong enough. But what if you're not failing? What if you're reacting exactly how anyone would, inside a system that is constantly, deliberately extracting from you? Consider this. Over 40% of adults worldwide report feeling anxious or worried most of the time. Youth mental health has declined sharply in exactly the years that smartphones and algorithmic social media became central to daily life. And yet the conversation we're given is almost always individual. If you're struggling financially, you didn't work hard enough. If you're burned out, you didn't manage your time well enough. If you're unhappy, you didn't optimize yourself enough. So instead of questioning the system, we question ourselves, or worse, we blame each other. While the people who benefit most from the system, the ones who own the platforms, the supply chains, the infrastructure, continue to accumulate more wealth, more power, and more influence over how the system evolves. In 2023, the world's 5 wealthiest individuals doubled their fortunes, while nearly 5 billion people grew poorer. That's not a coincidence. That's the system working exactly as it's designed to, challenging the narrative. And this is where the conversation gets uncomfortable, because the biggest winners in this system aren't just participating in it, they're shaping it, designing the platforms, influencing policy, deciding what gets funded, what gets amplified, and what gets ignored. We're told this is the best system we have, that it drives innovation, creates wealth, lifts people up. And in some ways, it has. But it's also concentrated power, not in governments that can be voted out, but in corporations and the individuals who run them. Expanding possibility. Here's what most of this conversation leaves out. This system isn't inevitable. It's just the one that's spread. History is full of societies that organize themselves around completely different priorities. Large communities, some with tens of thousands of people, where leadership wasn't concentrated in the hands of a few, but distributed across many voices, each representing different parts of society. Where decisions were made through argument and reason, not wealth and power. Where the goal wasn't to maximize what the top could extract, but to make sure no one's basic needs went unmet. These weren't small utopian experiments. They were complex, functioning societies. And we've barely studied them, partly because the history we've been taught is largely the history of the systems that won, the ones that spread by force. That replaced what existed before, often deliberately and often violently, with a single way of organizing power and wealth. And when one system conquers and rewrites the story, the alternatives don't just disappear, they get forgotten. Which means most of us grew up never learning that other ways of doing this even existed. We can also look at what's working today. Countries like Denmark, Finland, and Iceland have found ways to combine the innovation and productivity of market economies with strong social systems that genuinely take care of people. Universal healthcare, robust mental health support, worker protections, parental leave. They're not perfect, but they demonstrate something important. The choice isn't between pure capitalism and something unworkable. Better balances exist. And even those countries haven't begun to explore some of the deeper alternatives history has to offer. We'll be diving into all of that in a future video. But the point for right now is this. The system we have was built by people with specific priorities, and what's built can be rebuilt. There are already plenty of voices out there speaking to your pain, but a lot of them profit from keeping you angry, keeping you afraid, keeping you pointed at the wrong target, at each other, instead of at the structures causing the harm. This channel exists for something different, not to sell you a simple villain, not to make you feel hopeless, but to actually understand what's driving your struggles and to start building a clearer, more honest picture of what we could do about it. Because here's the truth. The system doesn't change with only a few talking about it. It changes when enough people see it clearly and start demanding something better together. Every time someone says, "I'm not the problem, let's talk about what actually is," that's the beginning of something. That's a small act of resistance. The narrative we spread matters. It shapes what people believe is possible. It shapes what we organize around. It shapes what we're willing to demand. So, if this resonated with you, share it with someone who's been blaming themselves for something that was never their fault. And subscribe if you want to keep pulling on this thread together, because we have a lot more to cover. And the more of us doing this honestly, the harder it is to ignore.